Welcome to DeadManTalking. Tonight's story is the final 2 chapters in the fantastic series from Girl from the Crypt. But do not fear, after speaking with her the other night, she is going to continue writing this series, so look forward to lots more on this storyline. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. And so, without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled I live on a farm out in the sticks. There are some strange creatures roaming our patch of land. Part 6. Let's get straight into that. Hunter sat the shovel aside and cleared his throat. The sight in front of him wasn't too appealing. My mother's dead body had been rotting away for the last few days, and, of course, the worms and maggots hadn't stayed away for too long either. Her face, once her pride and joy, was missing completely. In fact, the larger portion of her head was. I knelt down and reached out to grab both her arms before gently dragging her out of the grave. I heard Hunter gag behind me. "You don't have to look at it, if you don't want to," I said softly. Oh good Lord, I think I'm going to be fine," he replied, not too convincingly. "All right." I dragged the dead body a little further away from the spot where my brother's torso was sticking out. I had told Hunter to stay away from it, to not even touch it, just to be safe. I had taken a moment to look at him before we began digging. Ben's eyes were closed. His hair hung down into his face. It must have grown a bit since it covered most of it. I had never seen him look unconscious in the way he did, with half of his body stuck underground. My brother basically used to sleep with one eye open, always watchful, never defenseless. It was strange seeing him like that. "Looks like I'm doing a lot better," his voice had commented in my head. "I'ma try to hurry. Can't be long now." My fingers pierced the moist, loose soil. I took a handful of dirt and placed it atop Susanna Blanche's neck, where the missing portion of her skull was supposed to be. I repeated this until I had sculpted a face that rudimentarily resembled that of my mother. I then reached for the vial in my pocket and uncorked it. I slowly let the nymph's tears drip onto the shaped soil, the tiny drops immediately seeping into the brown dirt. I wiped my hand on my dress and opened my mouth. I slowly slid my fingers inside, drawing a long, thin line of saliva as I took them back out. The moment my wet fingertips touched the soil, images started flashing through my mind. Images of her. Susanna Blanche. Blonde hair, tan skin and blue eyes. Watery gaze, mother of 3. Never tired, never cheerless, never old. My mother. The woman who had held me in her arms as an infant. The woman who had left her 2 young children alone with only their older brother to care for them. She who had seemingly vanished but never truly let me out of her sight. She had always been there to watch out for us, albeit from afar. I wanted her back. When I pulled my hand away from her face, it felt like pulling at the roots of a plant. Something was holding me back. My fingers stuck to the soil. I pulled nonetheless. I clenched my teeth and kept pulling, and finally my fingers lost contact with the dirt and I gasped in relief. I immediately scrambled up and took a step back. I was just in time. The corpse began to move. My mother's body was shaking. Her fingers dug into the ground. Her arms and legs began twitching. The skin from her neck began stretching up, spreading over the dirt that had formed her face. Thousands of strands of hair shot up from her newly formed scalp and curled themselves around her shoulders. She contorted her non-existent mouth into a silent scream until the skin ripped open, making room for the air in her lungs to get out. Her cry broke the silence of the cool, starry night. The skin cracked open again and again. Eyes, nostrils, and ears formed on the canvas. That was my mother's face. I took a few steps towards her, my fist clenched around the herbs of the meadow in the woods. I knelt down and pressed my hand onto her forehead to keep her from squirming. As her blue eyes looked up at me, a hint of recognition seemed to spark within them. I stuffed the herbs into her open mouth and held it shut until she finally swallowed. This seemed to change something inside of her. Her legs stopped thrashing about, her fists uncramped, her eyes closed. She began breathing more slowly. Her whole body sank down onto the ground. She took a deep breath, her eyelids fluttered open. As she slowly, carefully sat up, her weakened arms almost unable to push her up, she turned her head to look at me. I wanted to smile, but I couldn't. The impossible had transpired in front of my own eyes. Susanna Blanche was back. Her skin had even regained a light sheen. Her hair, it was silky and shiny once again. When she reached out to touch my cheek, her fingers were warm and soft. The only thing serving as a reminder to her death was the state of her clothes, which were still torn and dirty. She was back. "Mum," I whispered. The second I uttered this word, I heard a loud thump behind me as Hunter's unconscious body hit the ground. It had probably been a bit too much for the poor guy. "Phoebe?" My mother's voice was hoarse and trembling. I nodded and she opened her arms. I'm usually not very affectionate as a person when it comes to my parents, but when Susanna had just returned from the dead, gestured for me to hug her, I didn't think twice. I wrapped my arms around her and buried my face in her shirt. I even sobbed a little, I think. "Shh," Mum said softly. She knew what had just happened. Of course she did. "You did so well, sweetheart," she whispered and gave me a slight kiss on the head. "Everything's going to be all right. I'm here now. Everything's fine now." It took me a while to calm down. All this time I hadn't really thought about what it would be like to revive a person. But now that it had happened, I was beyond speechless. I was happy. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that everything was going to work out. If something like this was manageable, so was everything that was yet to come. I felt prepared, even though I had no idea what for. Mum and I carried Hunter inside, and she immediately went upstairs to change into something nicer. Typical Susanna. If she had woken up caring for something other than her clothing, I would have probably taken that shovel and sent her straight back. That's how you make out an imposter, you know? While she was gone, Franco appeared, and I told him to sit down and wait. There'd be a surprise. When Susanna Blanche came back downstairs, the goat man nearly freaked out. He hugged her, then me, and then her thrice again, making her look a little uncomfortable. I sat both of them down and explained what had transpired. Franco was a bit angry that I didn't tell him everything at first, but he accepted my apology. I told them about Hunter's suggestion. "That's a great idea. Lord knows how many people those bastards have terrorized over the years. You're right. If we're going to end it, we have to end it once and for all. Either do it the right way, or not at all." Susanna Blanche sounded determined. "Agreed." Franco clenched his fists. "Ain't no way I'll let them get away with this. Not with what they've done to you guys. Not to forget Jerry. I brought him somewhere safe, but that's just a temporary solution. I don't want him to grow up without his mum and his siblings." "I want him back too," I confessed. "I really missed the little guy. We should wait for Ben to get out, though, also. We have to figure out where their headquarters are at, or where Cornwall lives. Either way's good." "Then it's settled," Susanna said. I went into the living room where Hunter was lying on the couch. I sat down next to him and called his name a few times. When that didn't work, I poked him a little. When that didn't work either, I slapped him. Hunter's eyes shot open and he sat up and he looked around still in a daze. "What? Where?" he stammered. "It worked. Susanna Blanche is back," I explained. "We've decided we'll inform the others. We need to start right away since it'll take a while to notify everyone. And I guess we'll have to do some explaining." Okay, so are we going to go to my parents first?" "Yep. You think they can handle this kind of situation?" "They're going to have to." Maggie and Owen Pellman were beyond confused. You could see it in their eyes. They didn't know whether or not to believe what we had told them. However, seeing as there was a goat man standing in their living room, they did not really have too much of a choice. They exchanged concerned glances before finally Maggie's voice broke the awkward silence. So, in short, you want us to help you go around and assemble everyone we know to take down the guy who preyed on your baby son, then killed you and your firstborn son, before your daughter resurrected you? Susanna Blanche sighed. Oh, come on. Anything sound crazy if you say it in that voice. Huh? Maggie replied. Nothing else, just huh. Well, Owen chimed in. You gotta admit, it sounds kind of fun. Maggie shrugged and nodded slightly. So, you're in or nah? My mum asked. Owen and his wife exchanged glances once again. And then Maggie looked up at us and said in a surprisingly determined voice, We're in. While Maggie stayed behind to ready all the firearms in the Pellman's possession, Owen loaded us all into his truck and drove us over to the neighbouring farm. It belonged to the Hayes. The Hayes are a family of 6, consisting of the elderly yet very active married couple Josephine and Earl Hayes, as well as their 3 sons Bill, Donnie and Floyd, and their daughter Florence, all of which are adults ranging from the ages 25 to 40. Convincing them was a lot easier, seeing as the sons all had a thing for my mum. Susanna Blanche talked to them for a little bit, and by the end of half an hour after we had arrived, they were ready to tear Cornwall to shreds. Florence, Earl and Josephine decided to join in on the fun as well. The next stop was the Coleman's farm. Patriarch clan of 10 people, including grandkids. Delmont Coleman is the sort of grumpy type, but I knew how to convince him. I told him my brother Benjamin was waiting at home, and if he wouldn't help us, he'd come by the next day and beat him up. Unable to tell if I was bluffing, he looked at me for a while until finally he turned around to shout into the kitchen. Bettina, get the guns! By the following nightfall, we had grown into a group of 57 people. We had all gathered on the Pellman's farm, and most were standing around and talking, waiting for what would happen next. We had managed to convince most of the other farmers to call over their more distant relatives to help. It was amazing. Susanna Blanche could just snap her fingers and they'd obey. If she wasn't flirting, she'd charmingly negotiated, got them to feel sorry for her. The few that remained were convinced by either their sympathy for me and my brother, or fear of the latter. We got them all prepared and ready to follow us as soon as we had solved some small remaining problems. Said problems consisted of us not knowing the address of the famed Centre for Cryptozoology yet, and Ben not having wakened yet. My mother told me she'd go back home to take care of the research, and that I should stay on the move to watch over the troops. We were all a little on edge, and Hunter seemed strangely calm though. Franco had taken to walking around with me, not straying from my side. He was a little frightened, and the other farmers had all encountered their fair share of cryptids before, but the fact that one of them was close enough for them to actually reach out and touch it seemed to dazzle them. Neither were they used to seeing a monster act so docile. Avoiding their curious stares, Franco shuffled around behind myself, close enough for me to feel his fur graze my back. "Man up," I hissed. "You're basically breathing down my neck at this point." "Oh, sorry. But they're all looking at me. It's getting me nervous." "It's fine. We'll just have to wait a little longer until Mum comes back." Suddenly, remembering something, I turned around to Franco and, clearly to his surprise, asked, "Say, what do you know about Mum?" "What?" Franco looked at me in confusion. "Like, who is she? What is she? Because I've been doubting her as being human as of lately." "Oh," Franco grimaced. "She never... Well, you're her daughter. I thought you'd know." "And you're the father of her 3rd child," I retorted. You got me there. You really want me to tell you, though? Don't you want to hear it from her herself?" "It took her a year to tell me she was a barkeeper. I don't know how long I have to wait for the answer to a question like this. And, if you have the right to know, so should I." Franco let out a long sigh. "First off, I only know bits and pieces as well. You could never know everything about Susanna Blanche Johnson. That's impossible. Your mum's an enigma, kid. I sat down on the wet grass and Franco plopped down beside me. When I first met her, she was sitting down on a large tree root. She was crying and quietly cursing to herself. Her clothes were laying beside her on a small pile. I wasn't surprised. I had seen a lot of tree nymphs around and knew they liked to go around naked. I was just a little confused why one would possess clothing in the first place. From the very start, I knew that your mum wasn't human. Part of her was, sure, but never quite. I was kind of rough at the time, but something about the way she was sitting there, crying and whimpering on, it got to me. I sat down next to her. She didn't acknowledge me at first, and for a while I wasn't even sure she'd noticed me. That was until she turned around and asked me, and I quote, "What the hell I was gawking at? You know, if I ever had a heart of stone during that time, I was one of the top-tier guys in the woods. One look at her tear-filled eyes could have unhardened it." I shot him a strange glance, and Franco cleared his throat. "Sorry, I got carried away there. Didn't mean to gross you out, you know. Either way, I asked her why she was crying, and she told me it was because her husband was, and again I quote, a huge asshole. I tried to comfort her a little, and she seemed to appreciate it. She appreciated it a little too much." I made a gagging noise, and Franco shrugged. "Oh, come on. You're more mature than that. Stuff like that happens. How do you think you and Ben ever came to be?" "Well, we kept talking, and she told me some really crazy stuff about herself. She told me about you and Ben, too. I asked her where she was from, but she said she was from the woods, just like me. I didn't understand. She had kids after all. She explained that her mother had been a nymph. Her father had been a human, though. Susanna Blanche had lived in the woods, yet kept wandering around helping out on the farms and stuff. She would always show up at the farmers' gatherings and parties, too. One day she met Arlo Johnson at one of these parties and went to live with him on his parents' farm. I guess that's what she wanted to know." I was speechless. "And she told you all of that in one night?" "Yeah, well, no. It was broad daylight, but you get the idea. Are you disappointed she didn't tell you herself?" "A little, to be honest." "I just think Blanchy just wants to keep you safe. Safe from knowing certain things. I don't think she's very proud of what she is. She sees herself as completely human and wants you to feel like a normal kid. To whatever extent that's possible, at least. She means well, but she worries too much. You being partly nymph doesn't mean you'll just tear off your clothes now and hop around in the woods in your birthday suit." I chuckled. "Seriously? Mum worrying too much? She's so cheerful. I don't think I've ever seen her cry. You describing it feels so surreal." "Well," Franco pointed at the crowd of people standing around in the fields, "you can't deny she knows how to use her powers." I shrugged and nodded. If it works, it works. I don't know where it came from, but the moment I finished that sentence, a shiver ran down my spine. My fingers began tingling and I felt a strange yet familiar sensation, like a warm blanket wrapping around me, or a hand patting me on the shoulder. It's hard to describe, but it was like a string that had been tied to me was moving. It was moving because someone on the other side was gently pulling on it, as if to alert me. I raised my eyes to the sky. The full moon was looming above the heads of me and my 50 companions. A gentle breeze grazed my ear, and somewhere in the near distance, my brother was pulling himself out of the soil. "Here he comes," I whispered, a smile on my lips. When Susanna Blanche's small car drove up to the house, about half-hour later, the passenger side door almost burst open as Benjamin dashed out into the open like a bat out of hell. It didn't take long for him to spot me, and by the time he did, I had already made it halfway over to him. He picked me up and swung me through the air and spun me around with me in his arms until I was dizzy. His roaring laughter pierced the relative silence of the night. He finally sat me back down and knelt down in front of me. I had already noticed the changes to his appearance, but now that I actually had the chance to regard him, they seemed even more striking. He had grown a couple of inches, and I guessed him to be around 7'6" now. He was also taking up a way larger amount of space. His shoulders were broader and his stomach wider. His face was the same though, dark, warm eyes, and a few faded freckles and a wide smile. He pressed me against his chest so tightly I swore I could feel his heart beat. "God damn it, Phoebe, I missed you so much," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you, sis." "Hey, you too." Susanna Blanche greeted us as she came up to us. I wanted to make some corny joke like, "Yo, Phoebes, I brought you a carrot," or something like that, but I guess it's too late for that now. "Did you find the address?" I asked. "Oh boy, did I," my mother grinned triumphantly. "It wasn't plastered all across the website or anything, but I found it after I did some digging. These guys have tons of self-esteem if they trust the internets with their data. And better yet, I also found Cornwall's personal address." A wide smile spread across her face as she spoke these final words, and soon enough I found the same wicked grin reflected on me and my brother's faces as we exchanged knowing glances. The three of us assembled in front of my mother's car, and Franco joining us in a hurry. The other farmers had noticed Susanna and Ben's arrival and were curiously approaching. Ben jumped onto the top of the car, the metal creaking under his weight. Susanna frowned at the cry of pain coming from her vehicle. My brother, now towering over the crowd's heads, even more impossibly, puffed out his chest and raised his chin. "Friends," he shouted out in a booming voice, "thank you for deciding to help us in our time of need. We're sorry for keeping you waiting, but it was worth it. We now know the exact location of the bastards who brutalized and hunted and pursued a family out of pure hatred and ignorance, who shot at a mother before the eyes of her child, who tried to break the bond between three siblings." "He really knows what to say sometimes," my mum whispered into my ear. I nodded approvingly. "He's awesome. He'd make a great cult leader." "Now, without further ado," Ben continued, "let's burn that shithole to the ground." The second the sentence had left his mouth, the farm people began cheering. Hunter was excitedly clapping and whistling, and Franco was drumming his hooves on the ground. Susanna Blanche thrust her fist into the air and hollered at some invocation over and over. What followed was the coordinated chaos of a witch hunt. My mother got Ben and me into her car and drove ahead of the others as the lead. The Perlmans got into their truck and Hunter helped Franco climb up onto the truck bed. Some of the others joined them until the vehicle was full. The Colemans, old-fashioned as always, had brought their, as Ben exclaimed, "fucking horses" to travel to the location. Now, thankfully, the Hayes and some of their other families had brought several separate vehicles, able to offer transport to more than a few persons. I felt like I was part of the head of a bloodthirsty, riled-up caravan. I shuffled around in the back seat until Ben, who was pressed tightly against the leather of the passenger seat, seeing as he is way too tall to fit comfortable under the roof of the car, gestured for me to come and join him. I carefully climbed out of my seat, and Benjamin lifted me onto his lap. His arms locked themselves around my stomach like a fleshy, fat seatbelt, and Susanna Blanche shot him a disapproving glance. "You know that's sort of dangerous, right?" she asked. Ben sighed. "Oh, Mama, out of all the things that could have happened to us these last few weeks, I think this is the least dangerous." I chuckled. Ben calls Susanna Mama. So seldomly the word itself sounds like a pun to me. He usually just says Mum or Susanna Blanche, like I do. I don't know why I was thinking about this at that time, but I was. I felt strange. I had never really been the violent type before, but somehow there was an urge inside of me, the urge to hurt those people who had hurt my family. And yet at the same time, I felt the warmth and peace of reunion. I would rather not describe the exact way to the headquarters of the Centre for Cryptozoology. It took us around 4 hours to get there, and so I guess I wouldn't be able to give an actual direction anyway. The actual reason is caution though. Ben always told me to never give away my address to anyone, and I guess this just feels a little too personal, even though I never even mentioned the state we all live in before. Although you can take a guess if you want to. To me, the whole charade was just way too exciting and weird. I was all jumpy and nervous. It got me tired, and so I dozed off in my brother's lap for an hour or two. I woke up to Ben nudging me in the side. "Phoebe, wake up. We're here," I heard him utter. I groaned and he gently pushed me off his lap, swiftly catching me as I was about to fall. It was very early morning and the sun hadn't risen yet. The cool air was welcoming and filled me with a sense of tranquility as I took a deep breath and sucked it in. We were standing in front of a large, gloomy-looking building. There was not a single tree or bush surrounding it, let alone another house. I had been to a hospital before, but this one looked even more sterile and dull. However, not in the same way, pleasantly intriguing way the hospital had. I could see that in a few of the windows on the top floor, the lights were still on. Probably some of the more eager madmen working overtime. My mother turned to look at our friends who had all gathered behind us. "You know the drill," she said in a clear voice. "Feel free to immobilize anyone who gets in our way with whatever means necessary. However, remember that there are kids here, so avoid bloodshed as best you can. Make sure to destroy everything that looks only slightly expensive. And also, if anyone finds that Blake Cornwall, don't touch him. He belongs to us." "You got it, Blanchy," Florence Hayes called out, and the others uttered words of approval. My mum then grabbed her shotgun and took a step forward. The large double doors were held shut by a massive lock. Susanna Blanche shot Benjamin an encouraging look, and my brother stepped forward and, with a single swift, powerful motion, he kicked down the left door. It burst open, accompanied by the sound of splintering metal. An impressed murmuring came from some of their companions. Others just nodded knowingly. "Well then," Ben said. He grabbed me and lifted me up onto his broad shoulders. It was almost a bit scary, being so far up above the ground. "Here we fucking go." What followed was chaos incarnate. Everyone stormed into the building, hollering and shouting profanities. I could spot Franco's dark shimmering fur somewhere in the crowd as it moved inside, and for a split second, I thought I could make out Hunter's flaming red head. I held onto my big brother as he followed the crowd inside. It didn't take long for the first computers and other technical gear to be located. Especially young Florence seemed to take a great liking to using the club she had brought and smashing everything to pieces. One of the Colemans had fabricated a makeshift torch and was wandering off with it into a room titled Archives. Susanna and the Hayes' son had made their way upstairs, probably to confront whoever had left the lights on. Hunter had brought a small slingshot and was using it to shoot up all of the breakable items he could find, including abandoned coffee mugs, chemistry gear, and window panes. Every single door in a building was either shot down, broken down, or kicked open. Not a single room or office was spared. Ben, who had made himself king of this havoc, was towering above everyone else, shouting orders and cheering, me still sitting on top of his shoulders. It was not until Franco called us over that he snapped out of it. The goatman was standing in front of a steel door at the far end of one of the longer corridors, and he was holding a small silver key in his hand. "What you got there?" Benjamin asked. "Susanna got the key from one of the eggheads upstairs. Told me to try and find the fitting doors. This is the one. I already took a look inside. There's this really big long staircase and it's pretty dark too. I can hear really strange sounds coming from somewhere inside, so yeah, I'm not going down there. Not on my own. After you though, tough guy." Franco opened the door and casually gestured for Ben to go ahead. My brother reached up to grab me and sat me down on the floor next to him. I instantly grabbed his hand and felt his warm fingers curling around mine. He smiled down at me reassuringly. "Let's have a look at it then." The noise of the destruction that was taking this place in the rest of the building was immediately drowned out as the steel door closed behind us. The darkness swallowed us whole, and I instinctively clung to my brother's warm, arm. Franco cleared his throat, and we stood still and unmoving, like three statues in the dark. Suddenly, I heard a low moaning coming from the bottom, and it sounded as if someone, or rather something, was crying, as if it was in pain. "Can you guys hear that too? That's not human, is it?" Franco asked in a hushed tone. "Yeah," Ben said, and I let out a small murmur in agreement. We stayed and listened for another few seconds. The whimpering got louder, and it started sounding like it was coming from more than one entity. It sounded kind of sad. "Whatever it is, it's in pain," I spoke up, trying to keep my voice down. "What do you suggest we do?" Franco responded. "Well, we go down there and figure it out, of course," Ben replied. "And we look for the goddamn light switch. Ain't nothing living in total darkness down there. That's impossible. And as sure as hell, I don't want to fall down the stairs." "Alright, give me a second." I heard Franco shuffle around behind us, his fur brushing against the wall as he fumbled around for a light switch. Finally, we heard a click, and a few dim light bulbs flickered to life above our heads. The three of us let out a synchronous sigh of relief, and we slowly made our way down the stairs, halting on each step, almost expecting something to come charging at us any second. But except for the whimpering getting louder, nothing happened. By the time we reached the bottom, all three of us were jumpy and on edge. I didn't dare believe my eyes. The bottom stretched into a long corridor, the sides of which were lined with prison cells. And while the corridor itself was dimly lit, most of the cages were laying in total darkness, and yet the things trapped inside them were clearly visible. Most of them had pressed themselves against the bars, clutching them with fingers and talons. Whatever it was their arms ended in, and I could hear Franco swallow audibly. The first cage we passed held a skinny, tall humanoid creature. It didn't have a single hair on its entire body, and its face was sunken and grotesquely misshapen. The outside of its mouth was lined with long, protruding yellow teeth, and even though I would have been terrified of this thing in any other situation, in that very moment, I could feel nothing but pity for it. The creature was injured. Multiple open gashes were visible all over its body. As we walked past it, the thing let out a desperate wail, as if it was trying to call for help. I dug my fingers deeper into the sleeve of my brother's shirt. We kept walking, none of us saying a single word. The air in the corridor was thick and stale, and we passed around 10 more cages containing creatures I had not even seen around the woods before. Some were just lying on the floor, broken and defeated, not even whimpering or crying anymore. Others were creeping around in the small spaces they were confined to, nervous and restless. Most gave a small sob or whine as we passed by. None of them showed any hostility, though. They were too weak for that. As we reached the end of the corridor, Ben halted in front of a single cage. I looked up to see 2 creatures cowering inside. Upon noticing us, the one on the right shot up and pressed itself against the bars, trying to reach through them and get a hold of my brother, growling and hissing as it did. Ben instantly took a step back and pulled me along with him, the hands of the creature clawing at nothing. The thing looked humanoid, but in a different way than the first creature we'd seen. It was even taller, but also wider, muscular. It was almost brutish in appearance. It, too, didn't have any hair, and the small slits it had for eyes were black and empty. And there was no nose either, just nostrils about a gaping maw, lined with way too many rows of teeth. It was only when I was done regarding this juggernaut of a monster that I directed my attention to the thing that was crouching down behind it. It was short, way shorter than its companion. It was lean and meagre. The way it was squatting down suggested an injury in the area of what I assumed were its hips. I could see long hair hanging down from its head, but that seemed to be the only other difference between it and its cellmate. "Calm the fuck down, man. I was just looking at you," Ben grunted, addressing the brute that was still trying to reach out for him. "He's scared," Franco suddenly chimed in a low voice. "He? What? Is he saying something? You can understand him?" Ben shouted, flabbergasted. "Of course I can. He's telling us not to go near her, and to leave her alone. He's protecting his girl. Ben cocked his head to the side. That's actually kind of sweet, even in a place like this. Agreed. It's not his wife, though, Franco replied. He listened to the brutish thing, snarling and grunting for another few seconds before speaking up again. It's his sister. Hit a nerve with you? A new voice sneered from behind us, a voice I immediately recognized. All three of us spun around at the same time to see Dr. Blake Cornwall emerge from the shadows. Ben let out a growl similar to that of the angry dog and immediately stepped in front of me as if to protect me from the mere sight of the doctor. The brute was going berserk, throwing himself against the bars of his cell, howling and screaming at Cornwall. Oh, shut up! The doctor shot him an angry glare. Blake fucking Cornwall, my brother hissed. So, you're the bastard who tried to steal my son, Franco remarked, his voice filled with a hatred like none I had ever heard from him before. His hoof was brushing against the floor, nervously. Yes, well, I guess not every mission can end up in success. Something about Cornwall's voice was different. It wasn't void and stern anymore. In fact, he sounded pissed. Mr. Johnson, I'll be honest with you. I didn't expect you to show up here, and I'll take it as a valuable lesson, though. A lesson not to trust normal bullets anymore. Let me guess. The girl did something funny to revive you. Ben gave no answer, merely raising his middle finger and uttering a low, "Fuck you," in response. I see. Should have killed her right there and then. That's what I get for being nice, Cornwall sighed. I knew there was something wrong with this little brat. That's what you are, aren't you? He bent over to glare at me. A pesky little brat. Listen up, you piece of shit. Ben raised his voice. It's game over for you from here. So stop talking smack in front of my sister. Or do you want me to make it more painful than necessary? Over? I don't think so. Cornwall raised his hand, and it was only now that I noticed that he was holding something. It was a small black remote control, and it took me a few seconds to put two and two together. Franco was a bit faster than me and Ben, and I could tell since I could hear him mutter, "Oh shit." And as soon as he laid eyes on the remote, Blake Cornwall chuckled. This little thing controls the lock of the cage door we're standing in front of. Isn't it crazy how dear to your heart you monsters hold your family? This big guy here you can trust. See how much he wants to get out. And before you ask, you don't have to worry about me. He's wearing an electronic shackle around his ankle. If he gets anywhere near me, it simply administers a light electric shock. Oh, don't look at me like this. It'll be interesting. Let's find out who's stronger. Subject number 7, as we like to call him, or Fat Benjamin Johnson. With that, he pressed a button on his remote control, and with a high-pitched beep, the cell door swung open. The brute stumbled outside, and he seemed dazed and confused at first, but it did not take long for him to recover himself, and as soon as he did, he came charging at my brother. Ben cussed sharply, and quickly pushed me aside, sending me stumbling into Franco's fuzzy open arms. Ben blocked the brute's attack with his arms and kicked him in the stomach. The impact of his foot hitting the bare skin of the creature sent him flying backwards against the iron bars of the neighbouring cell. "Phoebe, stay away!" Benjamin shouted. "Come quick!" Franco yelled, grabbing me by the wrist and starting to drag me towards the exit. "No!" I yanked my hand out of his grip. "We can't leave him here!" Dr. Cornwall let out a laugh as both of us turned into his direction. And before we could come at him, he turned and opened the door of the cell across from the one the brute had come from and slid inside, locking it behind him. Franco stomped on the ground, and I cursed myself for not having noticed the cell being empty. Meanwhile, the brute had gotten up again and had landed a blow to my brother's face, who in turn tried to push him against the cage again. "Look, man, I don't want to hurt you," my brother shouted at the monster, but his plea fell on deaf ears. It was then that I remembered the other creature that had been in the same cell with the Juggernaut. I rushed inside through the open door an inch closer to her. In the dim light, I could barely make out all of her features. She looked quite similar to her brother. However, her face was softer and more humanoid. Her narrow black eyes looked up at me pleadingly as I bent down. I saw my suspicion confirmed. There was indeed a large gash stretching from her ribcage area down the entire right side of her body. The wound was clearly infected, oozing pus and a strange dark substance I was unable to define. What I did next, I did for two reasons. The first one was that since the brute wanted to protect his sister, if he would see me help her, he'd stop attacking Ben. And so maybe, just maybe, he would see that we meant to help. The second one was compassion. The way the girl was sat, squatting down on the cold hard floor, the way she looked up at me with a mixture of despair and fear in her eyes. It made loose whatever reservations her and her cellmate's looks had caused me. I crouched down next to her and carefully placed my hands under her armpits. Her skin was cold and waxen. I gently lifted her to her feet. It wasn't too hard. The girl was just skin and bones. She immediately accepted my help, trying to push herself up using whatever strength she had left in those skinny legs of hers. Supporting her weight as best I could, I slowly walked her out of the cell. There, easy does it, I said softly in an attempt to soothe her nerves. Franco looked at me as if I had lost my mind, but I just nodded and he bit his lower lip. The goatman rushed to my side and picked up the young creature, lifting her up in a way a father would carry his tired child. "The fuck are you doing?" I heard Blake Cornwall growl. His voice had drawn the attention of the subject 7, who instantly stopped swinging his fists at my brother. Both him and Benjamin now stood still, staring at us. The massive creature was clearly trying to figure out what was going on, but as his sister uttered a soft, high-pitched coo, he dropped his arms and sunk his head. Ben took his chance and crouched down to tear off the electronic shackle from the brute's ankle. "Franco, get them out of here. We'll see to it that the others have freed too. But first we'll handle Cornwall." Ben sounded a bit breathless, but determined nonetheless. Franco nodded, and as he made his way over to the staircase, the brute followed him like a puppy with its owner. The door shut behind them with a clank, and Ben and I turned around to face Cornwall in his cell. And he looked aghast. "Well," Ben said, cracking his knuckles, "it's the three of us now, isn't it, Blake?" I cocked my head to the side, regarding the iron bars shutting the good doctor off from the two of us. "You think you can break him open?" I asked my brother. "I think so, sweetie. It'll take some time, though." Benjamin reached out in between the bars and grasped them in his massive hands. He groaned in exertion as the awful sound of metal creaking filled the corridor, and by the time he had let go, a gap large enough to press even his own broad shoulders through with little to no effort had opened between the bars. Or maybe not. These cells are kinda cheap, aren't they? The smug grin on Cornwall's face had vanished, and there was nothing left but pure fear in his eyes. "Ladies first," Ben said softly, gesturing for me to go in. I jokingly curtsied and slid into the cell with ease, my brother following closely behind. Both of us now towering above Blake Cornwall. The man was barely more than a nervous wreck, cowering in the far corner of a tiny room. Ben held out his hand to me, and I laid my own in comparison to his tiny hand in it, once again feeling his fingers curl around it. "You see, Doctor, what you'll never understand is that this world is wide enough for both monsters and men." Benjamin smiled down at me and, looking back at Cornwall, added, "Not for assholes, though." I live on a farm out in the sticks. There are some strange creatures roaming our patch of land. Part 7, the final. Let's get straight into that. The man cowering on the floor in front of me had a look of terror on his face that was unlike any I had ever seen before. The saddest thing was that he was sure trying to hide it. My brother was way too excited to administer punishment to the doctor, a punishment both of us felt was necessary. However, something was keeping him from taking action. I knew that because I felt it too. Ben was the first one to mouth the complaint, though. A simple execution would be too tacky, wouldn't it? I let out a sigh. It might, I don't know. Just a minute ago, I just wanted to tear his head off, but now, it does seem sort of cheap. I mean, for what he did and all. And just getting things over with as fast as possible. That's not really our style either, is it? Yeah, but what is our style? 4 generations of incest, from the looks of it, Cornwall grunted. Ben groaned, lifted his foot and kicked him in the chest. The doctor let out a gasp and retched lightly. You took a lot of smack for a guy trapped in a cell with 2 bloodthirsty hillbillies, I commented, only for my brother to nudge me in the side and correct me. What'd I tell you about using the H word? Sorry. Well, to get back to topic, I expected you to have something special in mind already. I mean, what you did to Franco was pretty creative. We could see if there's any sharp objects in here and poke his hands a little. We could, Ben replied, casually bringing his foot down on Cornwall's leg as he tried to get up. But I doubt we'll find anything useful. They probably have some high-tech med lab somewhere around here, but I'm sure as hell can't see it, and others have probably already wrecked it anyways. True, I agreed. Suddenly, I had an idea. I gestured for my brother to bend down so I could whisper into his ear. A smile spread on his face as I told him about my plan, and he nodded, got up and roughly grabbed the remote control from Blake Cornwall's shaking hands. This thing only operates 1 cell, correct? The doctor nodded with wide eyes. If I wanted to open the others, how would I do that? No, you can't! Please, please don't! The man on the ground whimpered, but his voice was cut off by Ben's fist connecting with his jaw. I sighed and decided that while my brother beat up the good doctor some more, I would look for some sort of releasing mechanism myself. I walked out of the cell and inspected the far end of the corridor, and there, just around the corner, was a small space in which I assumed Cornwall had stood awaiting us. There was a control panel of sorts fixed to the wall. Curiously, I let my fingers trace the outlines of rows of tiny yellow buttons. There was much of them as there were cells. I lowered my finger down onto one of them, but the button did not give into the pressure it was under. At first I thought it was due to a meager 12-year-old's lack of strength. I tried again, not so gently this time, but to no avail. I then took a closer look at the sides of the panel and found what seemed to be a keyhole. I rushed back into the cell where Ben was still busy thrashing the living daylights out of Cornwall. Stop that for a second, I ordered, and my older brother took a step back, a sheepish look on his face that was obviously meant to hide the pleasure he had taken in kicking and swinging at the more or less helpful man. I bent down to look at Cornwall. He had seen better days, really. His right eye was already swollen up completely, and his nose was bleeding in a manner that suggested Ben had broken it. I had never seen bruises form so quickly on a healthy person's skin before. My brother sure had done a good job on him, and even though I knew that, if he wanted to, he had already killed him. Rather, he had been toying with the doctor, not unlike a cat plays with a rat for fun before giving it a death bite. The key? I said softly. Do you have it on you? He didn't need to reply. I could see it in his eyes. Where is it then? If you give it to me now, I'll tell Ben to go easier on you. With pleading eyes and quivering lips, he reached into a pocket on his lab coat. His arm moved extremely slowly, and I noticed it was twisted in a painful-looking way. When his hand re-emerged, I took the small, shiny, silverish grey key from his trembling fingers. I got up and turned to my brother. What are you doing? He asked carefully. Opening cages. You best take him into the corridor already. I just need another second. I stepped out of the cell and walked back over to the control panel, giving one last look over my shoulder. I could see Ben had marched back over to Cornwall and once again looming above him. Play nice, boys. Moments later, I turned the key inside the keyhole and each of the buttons lifted up. One by one, I began pressing them, each pushing accompanied by the satisfying sound of a lock clicking and a cell door opening. And one by one, the creatures emerged. Dr. Cornwall found himself being dragged out onto the corridor by my brother, who had dug his fingers into his hair. What happened next, I can only describe in 3 words. Trial by fury. And a trial it was. The creatures recognized him immediately. Most were more intelligent than they had looked to be on a first glance, Some of them were holding back, circling the doctor with uncertain motions, seemingly not sure if they should attack or not. Others were less reserved, and as soon as they had left their cages, they leapt towards the trembling shell of a man cowering on the ground. The man who had mercilessly captivated and tortured them. As soon as the first let their teeth, claws, or whatever it was nature had equipped them with grazed Blake Cornwall's skin, the whole rest of them joined in on it. Benjamin had walked over to me, placing his large hand on my back in a comforting manner. He then grabbed me and lifted me up onto his shoulders again, and we watched as the creatures tore at the doctor's flesh, his screams of agony filling the entire corridor. The door at the far end across from us swung open, and I immediately recognized the tall, slender frame of my mother. Susanna Blanche walked down the stairs, her eyes fixed on the trial process happening in front of her on the ground. She looked for a path to come over to us, but the cryptids had formed a lump around Cornwall, effectively blocking the entire corridor. Susanna looked over at us with a grin and shrugged. She said something, but I couldn't quite understand it due to the monsters screeching and Blake's howls of pain. "What did you say, Mom?" Ben tried to drown out the havoc, but even his voice wasn't powerful enough to do so, and Susanna just looked at him weirdly and pointed to her ears, again mouthing something I couldn't understand. Ben sighed and then poked me in the leg. I bent down to look him in the face. Even though I could only see him upside down, I knew he was smiling quite happily. "What do you say, Phoebes? That's it?" "Justice has been served, I guess, but I kind of want to get out of here." "Oh, really? Why's that?" You know, riots, rampages, people being torn to shreds. I feel like that's just not my kind of thing. Too much violence, you know? I mean, you know, I'm not a wussy, but just a kid after all, and seeing all this bloodshed makes me a bit uncomfortable. Plus, it's really loud and noisy. I don't like that. I thought for a while and then asked, "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" Ben grunted. "I thought you stopped doing that. Last time you needed to come into bed with me was 2 years ago. You said you had a bad dream and I let you sleep next to me. Remember what happened?" I let out a sigh. "I fell back to sleep, had another bad dream and wet your bed." "Exactly. Which is why I told you you'd have to sleep on your own from now on. You're 12 by now too, so I really think you should get that under control." "Can't you make an exception? I promise I won't pee. I can even wear one of Jerry's diapers." "We'll see." We redirected our attention to the execution in front of us. Mum was still standing next to the scene as well, and by now casually leaning against the wall of the corridor. She had a satisfied smile on her face, and upon noticing our eyes even on her, she nodded at us and gave a thumbs up. We must have stayed like that for another 30 seconds maybe, and after that the hissing and growling died down. The screams of the doctor himself had long since faded to silence, and as the creatures stepped away from him, they revealed something that could rarely even be called a corpse anymore. There wasn't a lot left of Blake Cornwall. Those of the monsters who had swallowed the bits they had torn from him had seen to it that his guts were strewn all across the floor. Not one piece of the man had been left in place. Some of the creatures stood up to leave, others remained on all fours in a crouched position, but all of them were making it their way towards the exit. Most of them rarely acknowledged our presence. A few of them gave a light nod into our direction. A strange cat-like thing strolled by me and my brother and rubbed its head against Ben's legs before doing the same thing as it passed our mum, probably a sign of gratefulness. My mother had left the door open and the creatures freely made their way outside. Benjamin walked over to Susanna, who looked up at me with a gentle expression on her face. She reached up and patted my hand that was dangling leisurely next to Ben's shoulder. I closed my fingers around hers and she smiled. "What did you say before?" Ben asked. "We couldn't hear you, remember?" "Oh, that's nothing much. I just said that it was disappointing you guys had started a party without me." She sounded rather amused. "So, are you guys ready to leave?" "Wait a second," I commanded. "Ben, put me down for a second. Something's on the ground that's caught my eye." "Oh, all right." My brother bent down so I could climb off his shoulders, and I placed my feet onto the bloodied floor, and my legs still a bit shaky. I walked over to a piece of white cloth lying innocently in front of one of the cells, having been thrown there by some careless talon or paw. There was something black peeping out from underneath it. I reached out to pick it up. It was clearly a piece of Cornwall's lab coat. What was interesting, though, was that it was the very part of the coat that had a pocket, and in said pocket was a small VHS tape. I removed the white cloth to examine the tape, and miraculously it looked to be in good condition. Why did he have it with him, though? And then again, who even uses VHS tapes anymore? And with a frown, I let the tape slide into the pocket of my dress, and this was something that needed further investigation, for sure. I climbed back on top of my brother's broad back, and together, the three of us made our way out of the dimly lit basement. "Victory!" Delmont Coleman shouted in his deep, gruff voice, nearly blasting my ears off, seeing as I was standing right next to him. My mother, who had her arms around my shoulder and a beer bottle in her hand, raised the latter to drink health to the older man. It was the night after the great downfall of the Crypto Zoo eggheads, as my brother had taken to call it. After we had left the headquarters in a state of utter chaos, we had returned to the Pellman's property where they had taken a nap, either inside or in our respective vehicles. Afterwards, those who had enjoyed their rampage the most had gathered a supply of liqueur to celebrate. Now everyone was standing around in small groups talking to each other. And some of us were even dancing to the static-ridden songs Owen was blasting from a small radio on his porch. Franco had scurried off into the woods to retrieve baby Jerry from wherever he had been hiding him. I had initially planned to simply stay asleep, but Ben, on whose large stomach I had been resting, just had to get up and socialise, as he called it. I'm one of those people who just cannot sleep without at least a pillow or something, like a minimum of comfort. So after my conveniently fat and soft brother had left, there was not a chance of me getting some more rest. Speaking of which, socialise my arse. I could see him talk to Florence and one of the Coleman's daughters, and one of the older ones, Brandy, I think. And of course, he was holding a beer. Definitely not the first one he had had so far, and while I'm not a jealous person, there's just something about seeing my brother attempting to approach girls that rubs me the wrong way. I wouldn't call it jealousy. It's more like a general discomfort for bits of jealousy mixed in. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not about to fulfill every hillbilly stereotype in existence. I'm not interested in Ben romantically, or worse. What gets to me is the thought of him not being there for me anymore. However, there was something else occupying my head. I was overjoyed, in a way. After all, Jerry would be back any minute now. I feel like sometimes I don't express my feelings for my little brother too well, seeing as the bond between me and my older brother has existed for so many years. But I absolutely, utterly love the little guy with every fibre of my being. And one would think that Benjamin and I would hold him responsible for the breakup of Arlo and Susanna. But we're not in a movie here. This is reality, and in reality siblings often stick together more than one can imagine. Or maybe that's just a trait reserved to the Johnson family. Who knows? So there I was, half watching Ben, half watching for Franco to return with Jerry. I was itching to see my baby brother again. Hunter was standing near Susanna and me, helplessly looking around and taking a sip of his lemonade from time to time. I knew he was self-conscious and assumed he was a bit insecure due to the many people standing around in his yard. I smiled and, not straying from my mother's side, waved him over. "Hey there," he greeted me, a thankful look on his face. "You having fun?" Not much, I confessed. But Jerry will be back soon, so I'm looking forward to seeing him. Boy, I wish I had a brother, or a sister, or a dog at least. I mean, come on, I don't even care at this point. After what you guys have done for us, I'll be sure to come over with Ben and Jerry a little more often from now on. You've helped us a lot, Hunter. I really appreciate it." Hunter grinned. "Thanks." I gently removed my mother's arm from my shoulder and Hunter and I began walking off, a little further away from the crowd. "It's crazy, you know?" Hunter suddenly exclaimed. "I mean, you guys, your family, you're crazy. A good kind of crazy, no offence." "None taken," I offered. "Like, I've heard all these things about the woods, and I've seen the things in there, but I've always, kept my distance. How do I explain? It's just that you guys seem to be so close to them. Sometimes I wonder if you even belong on a farm. His voice had grown quiet and his eyes even looked up at me shyly, half expecting me to take some offence in his words. But I didn't. I understood. I knew what he meant. You're wondering if maybe we belong into the woods too, right? Hunter swallowed and nodded. I mean, your little brother is a furball. Your big brother is some kind of super strong giant. You're a necromancer and your mum is this crazy hot succubus lady. Nymph, I corrected him. What? She's part nymph. I guess I didn't tell you that yet. Sorry. Hunter let out a long sigh. Oh, I wish you'd talk to me more often. I know I'm not your brother and I'm not on the same wavelength as you two are, but you're kind of my best friend, you know? Yeah, I am, I shrugged. Out of the others here, I'm the one closest to your age and nearest to your home. Makes sense. You don't get it. It's not worth anything if you think about it like that. You gotta see it on an emotional level. What you said is true, but you're also the person I've interacted with the most, and I've told you quite a bit of myself. He hung his head. I'm fucking desperate. I mean, I'm 15 and the only friend I have is a dense 12-year-old. I watch so many movies, and whenever I see teen boys hanging out with other teen boys in some of them, I just start crying. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him at that point. I reached out and awkwardly patted his shoulder, remembering the tape in my pocket. I suddenly had an idea. Would you like to help me with something interesting again, maybe? I suggested. I'd like that. What is it? I quickly showed him the tape and explained where I'd found it. And this got him excited, and he quickly shuffled into his house and motioned for me to follow him. The Perlmans really have a nice home. It looks quite friendly and is always tidy and clean, not like the house we live in. I still remember my 11th birthday, when in an attempt to surprise and scare me a little, Ben had glued the tray on which he had served the birthday cake to a bunch of rats. Owen and Maggie had brought Hunter this tech stuff. Not only does he have his own PC, TV and console, he also has some really old-fashioned things, like a VHS player, apparently. After leading me into his room, he did his magic and connected the player to his TV. I handed him the tape and we sat down on the floor in front of the screen, and both of us staring up at it with wide eyes. It didn't take too long for the screen to come alive. I shrunk back a little when I saw a familiar face of Blake Cornwall appear on the monitor. Seeing a person you've watched being devoured by monsters on screen a few hours after their death sure is a sort of eerie in a way. His face was almost filled out the entire screen, but the bits of background that were to be seen indicated him being in an office of sorts. Hunter and I exchanged quick glances, and he turned up the volume a little. Blake Cornwall began to speak. His voice was hoarse, and from time to time he had to stop in his speech to let out a dry, raspy cough. This is the fifth tape I'm going to record, and this one is about the Johnson family. I'll be honest, I do not quite know where to start, but I'll go to this chronologically. I guess I'll just start with the little one, the baby, Jerry Johnson, a hybrid between what we call a goatman and a nymph-like human. His father, one of the more powerful instances amongst his species, seems to be around 3 to 4 decades old. He's one of the subjects who have proven our theory of only one existing goatman wrong. And this is a reference to the 3-week-long surveillance of the areas of interest, which we monitored in order to determine the numbers of certain species of cryptids. But I digress. The capabilities of this very individual, Jerry, that is, have not been determined yet due to his young age. But we suspect him to become rather strong once he has matured, probably exceeding his father. Therefore, it is still very important to us to capture him. But it is not only containment we're talking about here. He paused and coughed a couple of times before clearing his throat and continuing. Our centre has been investigating cryptids for over 10 years now. We are fairly young and a small organisation, but we have already achieved quite a lot. We have never come across a case like that of Jerry before, though mixed-race repopulation amongst cryptids is an extremely seldom occurrence, which leads us to the next subject involved in this matter, the mother. Her full name is Susanna Blanche Johnson, age 35 at the time of this recording. I have nicknamed her Echnida, quite fitting, seeing as she is indeed the mother of monsters. Susanna Blanche Johnson is, as we have found out, at least to a certain extent, a nymph. These creatures are known for their superficial charm and pleasant appearance, as well as their very high libido. As one might say, it seems to be a natural pattern of behavior for them to converse romantically with as many males as possible. Now, nymphs are always female, and their preferred prey, if I may call it that, consists mostly of human males. Humanoid cryptids are seldom fancy of nymphs. So, Echnida copulating with one is strange enough in itself. What makes her especially interesting as a subject, though, is the fact that she seems to be very fond of her offspring. An uncommon trait among nymphs, probably a byproduct of her being part human herself. She also knows how to flawlessly interact with human beings of all genders and ages. Next on our list is Susanna's firstborn, Benjamin. 16 years old as of this recording. He is a very interesting subject, seeing as we have never had the chance to investigate a case of a human male influenced by nymph DNA. Extremely tall and physically strong. Not very smart, though. What a dick, I muttered, and Hunter nodded. He seems to have developed an extremely strong bond with his female sibling ever since her early childhood. A friendship accompanied by the pathological need to protect the girl child at all costs. Their relationship almost reminds one of a rudimentary symbiosis. He offers her protection, as she looks after his health and hygiene. She, just like her brother, is a subject of interest to us, seeing as she shares his genes. Her traits, however, manifest in completely different places. He's talking about you, isn't he? Hunter asked. He is, and how exciting, I replied dryly. In fact, we have not proven her to have any anomalous characteristics so far, but we suspect she has some hidden underlying talents, even though she hasn't exhibited them yet. She is 11 years old as of now and goes by the name of Phoebe. We have watched her for a while now, from the day on which we were alerted to Echnida's third pregnancy on. She displays a special interest in the medical treatment of ailments and wounds of any kind, often trying to replicate hospital conditions during her so-called operations. The procedures are apparently more successful than what one might expect. We believe that this might come into play with her actual powers later. The legally wedded husband of Echnida, Arlo Johnson, is an ordinary man, albeit a rather capable farmer. He has absolutely no anomalous properties. However, we will have to monitor the development of his and Echnida's marriage. If we're lucky, we might see after the elimination of Echnida herself. It would spare us some trouble. None of the Johnsons have noticed our ongoing surveillance of their everyday life. We wish to keep it that way. The birth of Jerry took place 1 week ago, and we do not know yet how long it will take to. Another voice shouted, something from somewhere in the background, and Blake Cornwall spun around. All right, keep her at bay. I'll be there in a second. With that, he turned off the camera, and his face vanished from the screen. I swallowed. Are you all right? Hunter asked, a concerned look on his face. Yeah, it's just... they've been watching us for over a year. Over a year, Hunter. I can't believe we never noticed. It's not your fault. I mean, they were probably pretty sneaky. Who knows how they kept an eye on you guys. Also, Cornwall had it with him for some reason. That'll mean he was expecting us, sure. In the end, we succeeded and stuff, but it makes me feel really damn strange, you know? Hunter shrugged. But he's dead now. No need to think about him anymore. Just forget about it all. It's over. Whatever. I leaned over and took the tape out of his VHS player, safely tucking it back away into my pocket. Thank you for your help. I bet Franco will be back any second now. Granted, we haven't missed him. Well, let's go outside. My friend agreed and we returned back to the outdoors. We hadn't been gone for long and yet my older brother was sitting on the porch, awaiting us. What were you doing? He asked sharply. It got on southern again. "Making out," I replied. I watched with satisfaction as for a split second Ben's eyes displayed utter horror, a mixture of fear and disgust I had never seen him show before. Which is a big deal considering we had just raided a monster dungeon and passively killed a mad scientist. He opened his mouth as if to start yelling, but quickly closed it again, seeing as not a sound came out. I chuckled. "Calm down. I was just messing with you, dimwit." Benjamin let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, don't ever do that again." We were watching that tape I found in a rags of Cornwall's lab coat. Turns out he's been spying on us for some time. Nothing new there, though, other than that. And besides, don't you have better things to do? Where's Florence and Brandy? First off, her name's Brandine, and second off, I ain't letting my little sister go away just like that. Especially not with one of the kids that reeks of desperation and will probably sodomize his own. "Oh, shut it, will you?" I interrupted him before he could finish whatever obscenity had come to his mind. Ben shot Hunter a menacing glare before placing a beer bottle he was holding on the railing of the porch and kneeling down. "Come on," he grunted. I smiled and climbed onto his broad shoulders. I hit my head when he stood back up, and he immediately apologized and carefully maneuvered us out onto the grass again. "You've grown so tall," I remarked. "I bet I can pick apples real good like this." I had just finished this last sentence when from out of the trees the sound of hooves drumming onto the ground reached our ears. Ben spun around and we saw Franco emerging from the tree line at full speed. He was holding something tiny and brown, a familiar figure that was huddled into his arms. I looked around to see my mother quickly run towards him, her arms open. "Jerry!" she shouted, and as Franco held out the infant to her, she grabbed him and pressed him tightly to her chest. "The little one's back, y'all!" Franco exclaimed, waving us over. Ben dashed towards him, me on his shoulders. My little brother was as happy and unperturbed as always, and when I leaned over to tickle his fluffy little stomach, Ben remarked curtly, "Wow, he hasn't seen us for 2 weeks, and he doesn't give a damn." I shushed him and hopped off his shoulders. Ben, Mum and I spent the rest of the night taking turns cuddling the infant, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like everything was right where it belonged. It only came to me the following night when I was lying on my bed, unable to sleep, that I missed something. A certain smell. I had never thought I'd miss it so much, not after what had happened between us, but in the end, I am my father's daughter. Tobacco and hay. I snuck outside into the backyard. I climbed the fence and made my way past the meadow behind our house and to the edge of the woods where we had dumped him. His body lay on the other side of the rivulet that crossed the meadow. The corpse had entered a state of decomposition where everything starts to look really gooey and strange. Some smaller animals had apparently taken a bite, but most of the flesh was still there where it belonged. I scratched up some dirt from the ground, with which I filled the eye sockets. I assumed birds had picked at them. That would explain the missing eyeballs. I had neither nymph tears nor herbs with me. Instead, I was carrying a large kitchen knife. I had decided I would make use of it in case the resurrection went wrong. I knew Benjamin would never let me revive my arsehole of a father, and if I were to go into the woods for herbs or nymph's tears, he'd get sceptical, and I just knew he would find out. I couldn't allow myself to act suspiciously. I just had to try and hope for the best. I let my saliva drip all over his face. I even spit onto his chest just to be safe. And finally, I stuck my finger into my mouth, and it still tasted a little like soil, and touched his forehead with it like I had done with Mum. I wanted him back. I was my father's daughter, and I wanted him back. I watched as Arlo's body began twitching, writhing, contorting in the same twisted manner as Mum's had. The difference was that it wouldn't stop. I threw myself on top of him, clutching at his shirt in a morbid embrace. I cried, I begged, but it wouldn't stop. It was only when I thrusted a knife into his chest that the spasms died down. I wept as I pulled it out again. I was still weeping when I walked back home. I wasn't about to give up though. I decided I would talk to Mum. Maybe she would understand. She had to. Arlo hadn't been a great guy, but he hadn't deserved this. But I wouldn't talk to her until the morning after. I felt like I really needed to rest then and there. I hid my dirty jacket and the knife underneath the porch, and left my mud-stained shoes outside. I went up the stairs and gently nudged the door to my brother's room. I could see the faint outline of his large body underneath his blanket, his chest rising and falling in a comforting manner. He was snoring lightly, and I carefully, quietly lifted myself up onto his chest, and somehow this woke him up anyways. "Sis?" he uttered sleepily. "Is it okay if I—" "It's fine. But just for tonight, okay?" "Okay," I whispered and crept underneath his blanket. I turned my face to him and placed my head on his pillow. My brother sighed softly and gave a half-hearted smile. "Anything keeping you up?" he asked in a low, hoarse voice. "Nothing in particular," I replied. "There's something though, isn't there? Let's talk about it tomorrow, okay?" "Sure." I was about to close my eyes when Benjamin suddenly uttered, "I think I'm going to have one of my weird dreams again. I haven't told you about them, but I used to have them all the time when I was a plant. And before that too, sometimes, but just—" A long yawn erupted from his explanation. "Just occasionally." "Oh yeah? What are they about?" "They're of trees. I'm walking through a forest, ripping out trees by their roots as I go. Sometimes you're there too. You walk along behind me, planting the trees back in and reviving them or something. I don't know why, but they're nice dreams." With that, he buried his head deeper into the pillow, and a mere minute later, he was sleeping soundly again. I laid awake for a little longer, but it wasn't the unpleasant kind of wake. I was at peace. I knew that Susanna and Franco were sleeping in the master bedroom with little Jerry. Neither of them had wanted to let go of the infant, and so they had compromised for the night. I knew that my dead father was lying around somewhere behind the house, but I also knew I could worry about that later. I'd find a solution soon enough. I knew that Blake Cornwall was dead. I knew he wasn't able to harm us ever again. But most importantly, I knew that my brother was right by my side, my angel, my guardian. He was there with me. I didn't need to be afraid, and his weird dreams, I'd figure those out too somehow. I'll probably get used to Mum being at home more often too. I'll get used to everything in time. To all the people who have consoled and given me advice in my time of need, thank you. I appreciate it. If anything else out of the ordinary happens again on our patch of land, I'll be sure to write about it again sometime. Be it just for the fun of it. Wow. Absolutely awesome, imaginative, wonderful story there. Thank you so much, Girl from the Crypt. First time on this channel, and I can already see it becoming a quick channel favourite. I know we discussed the other night that you'd like to continue this series, and I'm sure as hell that the listeners and myself would like you to continue the series as well. So I look forward to any updates on that, and of course it would be an absolute honour to narrate that as well. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know down below in a comment what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. I hope you all had a wonderful, warm and merry Christmas with family and friends and too much food and good drink. I know I did. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.